Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode 509 for the 22nd of July 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia, using my new Yellowtech IXM microphone. This is a wonderful microphone. This is the exact model Maynard has been using for years now, and Maynard, being a professional broadcaster, certainly knows his stuff when it comes to microphones. He, the other week, he let me know that one popped up on eBay at a very good price. So I went for it, and luckily I was the winning offer. And hello. It's the Skeptic Zone cats. I'll just shoo them out. Go on, shoo. Out. You two, right. Cats interrupting the podcast. Anyway, I was the winning offer, and now I have a wonderful professional microphone, which the years Maynard's been using this, I've been so impressed. This is not a promotion for the company Yellowtech. It just happens to be a matter of fact that this is a really good microphone. And it's only because of your support, listeners, the listeners who financially support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv with micropayments or Patreon, that I was able to afford it. I hope that I'll put it to very good use to bring you lots of interesting reports in the future. But coming up on this week's show, facilitated communication. I'm going to read out a story published a little earlier this year, written by Professor Christopher French and Michael Marshall in the UK, about a case in the UK of what we call facilitated communication. This is where somebody who is profoundly disabled, really unable to communicate, can communicate, it seems, using help. It's a bit hard to explain, and each case is unique. But basically, somebody who's really unable to communicate can suddenly communicate if somebody looks at their eyes and decides where they're looking on a page, or holds their hand and guides their hand to letters on a letterboard or something like this. It's viewed with great skepticism, and it can be a very interesting and sad case of people willingly deceiving themselves, and it's just filled with all sorts of emotions because it's normally the parents of very disabled children or young people who are involved with this. We will also be interviewing Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia about this topic, as she has done a lot of research into this to update Wikipedia pages. That's all coming up at the top of the show. Following that, frightening news for Sydney and the world. We're going to read out a flyer that's been doing the rounds here in Sydney, warning of a impending tsunami. I better get my water wings ready. And also a poster that appeared briefly around this area of Sydney, the inner west, warning of geoengineering from the skies. Then to round off the show, Maynard interviews Mike Bohler from the Skeptics Guide To Conspiracy podcast in Chicago, talking about death from the skies and impending tsunamis and things like that. Mike hosts a weekly show talking about all sorts of conspiracy theories, from 9/11 to various assassinations, JFK, and so on and so on and so on. And Maynard catches up with Mike to ask him why he does his show, about his show. And I hope you'll find this interview very interesting, or maybe it's just a conspiracy. But now it's time for me to run downstairs. And as some people have noticed, in the past week I took possession of something else on eBay, a microwave chip or crisp maker. This is something I saw online and I thought, it's only a couple of bucks, I'll give it a go. So it's like a round, white sort of plastic dish with lots of grooves in it, raised grooves. You slice up a potato very finely, put one slice each in the groove. It's about, 30 or 40 grooves. Put it in the microwave for about 10-15 minutes depending, and ding, out pop crispy potato crisps with no oil. It's really nice. I'm going to run downstairs, chop up a potato, put it in the microwave and enjoy those. While I'm doing that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Why communication from a locked-in child is a miracle we must question. This comes to us from The Guardian Online, written by Christopher French and Michael Marshall, published on the 6th of February 2018. If Jonathan Bryan can communicate, we should celebrate, but hard evidence is needed before we change how severely disabled children are cared for. There has been much coverage lately, including The Times, The Mirror, The Daily Mail, and tonight's BBC documentary special of the story of 11-year-old Jonathan Bryan and his remarkable ability to write poetry, keep a regular blog, and communicate with his parents in spite of his severe and debilitating cerebral palsy. Now, Jonathan, who communicates via a spelling board with the help of a facilitator who carefully watches the movements of his eyes, is using his own experience to campaign for a reform of how severely disabled children are taught. Jonathan has been disabled since birth, when doctors warned that he had suffered such severe brain damage, such as Jonathan's Guardian's article last year explained, quote, "The MRI scan of my brain was one of the worst the technician had seen," end quote, that he may never be able to run, walk, or even recognize his parents. With such a bleak prognosis, the progress Jonathan appears to have made is truly remarkable. Quote, "Nothing short of a miracle," end quote, as his parents describe it. Jonathan's apparent ability to communicate far beyond what was ever predicted for him, even outlining his nuanced take on the EU referendum, quote, "It's time to pull together," end quote, in the Daily Mail in 2016 when he was just 10, led to the start of the Teach Us Too campaign, which has such support that Jonathan has presented at augmentative and alternative communication conferences and has even met with MPs to lobby for educational changes. Jonathan's online petition has more than 220,000 signatures. As the media coverage and Jonathan's blog have stressed, he is an example of what patients who are apparently, quote, "locked in," end quote, fully cognate but unable to communicate, are capable of achieving. Jonathan isn't the first locked-in patient whose communicative abilities have astonished the media. In 2006, Rom Huben was hailed by Belgian neurologist Stephen Lories for his ability to type out his thoughts on a keypad via the help of his facilitator, Linda Walters. Despite having been in a coma for 23 years and assumed to be non-communicative, Walters interpreted subtle movements from Huben's right hand to guide his fingers to the desired letters, in a case that garnered international attention. Shortly after his story was published, concerns were raised over this method of communication. Videos of messages being typed showed Walters deftly and quickly moving Huben's hand around his keyboard, apparently following the subtle indications of the locked-in patient, crucially even when the patient was not looking at the keypad. Psychologists familiar with attempts to reach non-communicative patients recognize Huben's case for what it was: facilitated communication. Facilitated communication, FC, is a method for assisting a non-verbal person in communicating, where the facilitator is guided to choices of letters or words via small physical signals from a patient. The technique rose to prominence during the 1980s, but subsequent controlled testing reliably demonstrated that subjects were unable to produce information that had been shown only to them. In short, the messages were not coming from the patients, but from the facilitators who were, quote, interpreting, end quote, which letter or word was being indicated. Perhaps most importantly of all, facilitated communication can be done entirely accidentally, with no need for malice or harmful intent. Often good intentions and the deep desire for contact leads the facilitator to spell out the messages themselves without even convincing themselves that they were led to a letter or word by the subject, in much the same way that users of dowsing rods convince themselves that their tools are leading them to water. It's all too easy to dismiss facilitated communication as harmless. After all, if it works, a previously uncommunicative person is able to share their thoughts and connect with the world. If it doesn't, a family gets a connection, albeit a false connection, to someone they love but feared they'd never hear from again. However, as with many superficially harmless pseudosciences, there are case studies that stress the need for caution and reflection, including dozens of extremely troubling examples in which allegations of physical and sexual abuse have been made based solely on the reports gained by facilitated communication. Few things could be more distressing than the thought of being genuinely locked in, cognate but unable to communicate, and forced to watch helplessly as you're effectively used as a human Ouija board, spelling out a message that falsely accuses your loved ones of terrible and utterly fictional crimes. In Huberman's case, when concerns were raised regarding the veracity of his messages, independent tests were carried out. Huberman was shown a range of objects and asked to name them. When Huberman was unable to name any of the objects shown to him when Walters was not in the room, Lauries accepted that Huberman had not been responsible for any of the messages and conceded that facilitated communication, in all its flawed promise and false hope, was responsible for Huberman's apparent cognancy. Once you're familiar with facilitated communication, it's very hard to look at Jonathan Bryan's remarkable progress and not ask some questions. I sincerely hope Jonathan's case is different from others in the past, and that his ability to outperform children almost twice his age at maths merely shows his enthusiasm for learning. I also hope that despite his young age and relatively recent literacy, that he is genuinely able to write the kind of prose littered with alliteration and assonance that most adults could not achieve. Unfortunately, this eloquency and fluency, termed, quote, unexpected literacy, end quote, in the scientific literature, is one of the red flags for facilitated communication. If the communication is actually coming not from an 11-year-old child, but unintentionally from the adult charged with interpreting his messages, that literacy and numeracy becomes far less remarkable. There are, unfortunately, other red flags that are hard to ignore. Video footage of Jonathan and his spelling board shows his facilitator nimbly identifying letters at speed, even when Jonathan appears to be looking elsewhere. Of course, without first-hand experience, we should not rule out that his facilitator has such experience of working with Jonathan that she is able to read these movements accurately. But the involvement of a human interpreter invariably introduces the possibility of accidental bias and the kind of issues we've seen before with facilitated communication. These concerns are hard to dismiss without independent testing and verification. In much of the media reporting of Jonathan's story, his spelling board is compared to that used by Stephen Hawking, whose own non-verbal condition is the result of a degenerative disease that has progressively paralysed him since he first experienced symptoms as an undergraduate at Cambridge. Today, and we remember that this story was written earlier this year, today Hawking communicates via highly sensitive sensors rather than a manual spelling board. Jonathan, too, has tried a technological solution, an eye gaze system that monitors and accurately reacts to the subtle movements of the eyes. However, his attempts were in vain, as he explained to The Guardian, quote, "It was frustrating because the computer couldn't read my eyes very well, but my mother and carers could," end quote. In fact, as the Times reported, quote, when his mother offered him the new eye gaze technology for communication, he didn't like it and said, quote, "Chuck it out the window," end quote. It may be legitimately the case that Jonathan didn't like the new technology and preferred to work with his communicator. But sadly, there is another less hopeful explanation. for the failure of the eye gaze system. If Jonathan's messages were actually the result of facilitated communication, as prone to accidental bias and unintentional human influence as it is, the accurate eye tracking technology would remove that bias and offer a true reflection of Jonathan's ability to communicate, or lack of such ability. It is important to stress that I haven't met Jonathan, his parents, or his facilitator. It might be that they have already carried out the kind of simple, careful tests that would ascertain for sure that the messages being written are coming directly from Jonathan. I sincerely hope so, and that Jonathan genuinely is the smart, thoughtful, astonishingly mature young boy he seems to be in his writing. I wish nothing but the best of health to him, and whatever level of academic ability he has, it's clear he has a family who love him deeply. However, before any decisions are made to radically change the way we care for and teach severely disabled children, it's vital that the methods of communication that justify these changes are thoroughly, independently, and unbiasedly tested and proven to be accurate. It's hard to ask tough questions when you so badly want something to be true, but it's even harder to find out that you've caused inadvertent harm to vulnerable children simply because those questions were never asked. Professor Christopher French is head of the Anomalistic Psychology Research Unit in the Department of Psychology at Goldsmiths University, London. Michael Marshall is Project Director at the Good Thinking Society and Vice President of the Mersey Skeptic Society. And of course, I will supply a link to this article on the show notes, and thank you to Michael Marshall for pointing this article out to me. Joining me now on the line, as she often does, all the way from Salinas, California, from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia, Susan Gerbic. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Richard.
Great to catch up with you. Of course, it's always great to catch up with you. Before we get started into this interesting and somewhat troubling subject of facilitated communication, what's the latest news with guerrilla skepticism?
Wow. Well, guerrilla skepticism, as usual, is doing just great. We've just added our I think 658 or something like that Wikipedia page, and we just hit 28,620,409 Wikipedia page views.
Wow, but who's counting, right?
Yeah, we're not. We're counting just the pages that we've worked on and done serious work on, not just the small edits we do all the time.
Wow, that must keep you very busy.
I love it. It's a full-time job. I don't get to edit as much as I did in the past. I'm more managing people and training, which is really what I enjoy the most.
That's fantastic. Now, we'll get to some more news about what you'll be doing soon. But let's look at this subject of facilitated communication. So I've known about this subject for quite some time because many years ago, my good friend Professor Paul Willis, who was working for ABC Radio at the time, did a series which is still available online, and I will add a link in the show notes, called the Correx Files. And in one of these little episodes, it was sort of like Skeptoid before Skeptoid. He talks about facilitated communication, and he interviews James Randi. And that's where I first heard about this. But I noticed just lately, over the past week or so, you've been publishing articles about this yourself. What's your interest in this?
Well, I have been aware of facilitated communication for a few years after making the acquaintance of some of the more prominent people in the community who are on our team. And what I've done is I've been listening for a long time to people saying, we got to do something, Most of the people we've been hearing from are the academics. They tend to have a different way of doing things, and that is to write and to research and to publish.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's not how I do things. I'm much more of a doer. So a while ago, I thought, you know what, let's take this on. So the first thing we did is, it's a 5-step plan. The first thing we did was to rewrite the Wikipedia pages for facilitated communication for rapid prompting method, which is kind of the same thing. It's like cousin to facilitated communication. And also we've been working on Wikipedia pages for people associated with facilitated communication. My idea was that when we try to go to the media and try to go to the public to end facilitated communication, we need to make sure that they have a way of understanding what it is. We don't want to re-debate it. We don't need to go back and have the discussion, does it work anymore? It doesn't work. It's been debunked 30 years or more ago.
Yes, it reminds me of that old expression we use from time to time, unsinkable rubber ducks.
Right, and I think that we don't have a great plan in the skeptic community how to deal with unsinkable rubber ducks. We need to stop fighting them on their terms, trying to debunk them and write another article about it. We need to be done with that. So the first step, as I said, was to make sure that the Wikipedia pages were in terrific shape, and they are. Anybody wants to read the facilitated communication or rapid prompting method Wikipedia pages, plus various people that are mentioned on there, those pages are in terrific shape. The second thing was to get together a group of people who are experts. And we have, maybe 30, 40 PhDs. Most of them are experts in the medical field or in facilitated communication or communications, experts on autism and things like that. So we have about 40 people who have letters after their name. And we picked one goal, and that was my third thing, is to pick a goal with a limited time. And we picked the University of Northern Iowa. The reason why we picked the University of Northern Iowa is because they are offering a facilitated communication workshop. They had it last June, and this is their 5th year doing it. And they're supporting facilitated communication using the name of a university. This is a public university who is supporting facilitated communication for whatever reason, we don't know. So the next thing we did was we sent a very well-written professional letter to the university, to the deans, and copied everybody we possibly could and explained to them that facilitated communication is not only a pseudoscience, but it's harmful. You're taking the voices of those people, because the people that you think you're facilitating are not facilitating. You're putting words in their mouth. So we changed our name to be called True Voices. We took over that phrase as in, we're trying to take the high road, because that's what they do is they say, oh, we're really, you guys are evil and mean, you skeptics. You want to take the voices away from our people. And what we're trying to say is, no, we're not taking the voices away. You are. So we came up with the term True Voices, and we wrote to them. And also we put them on notice. We said, University of Northern Iowa, if you are accused, or if anybody coming out of your training is accused of a crime, you're liable, because you've been made aware that this is pseudoscience. They won't be able to go to court later and say, we did not know that facilitated communication is a pseudoscience. We did not know that it does not cause harm, and so on. So we were going at it from that perspective. So we've had some results with the University of Northern Iowa. At first, when we sent the letter to them, the dean responded that they were going to go ahead with the next workshop in 2019, and if the faculty wanted to, they could become involved in the planning of the facilitated communication process workshop. After a few weeks of media coverage, really pretty much embarrassing the University of Northern Iowa, which was our plan. That's kind of not very nicely said, but that's really what we were trying to do. We asked them nicely, and when they didn't respond, we felt we had to be a lot more aggressive. They finally responded saying that they're going to have a meeting, and they may not be associating with facilitated communication in the future. So we're waiting to find out the results of that meeting. So now what we're doing, since we have a group all together and we're motivated and organized, and we have everything else done correctly, as far as, know who to contact and what's going on, we're going to go after, University of Syracuse in New York, which is the big dog. That is where the hub of facilitated communication is. That's where the money is. So they're having a workshop, a conference in, I believe it's September or October. I can't remember offhand. And we're going to be trying the same tactics with them to try to get them to comply and end their association with facilitated communication.
That's very interesting. And as I said before, it was first brought to my attention in this show called The Correx Files. And I encourage listeners to click on the link in the show notes and you can read Paul Willis interviewing James Randi all about it. Well, Susan, it's interesting because from our point of view, and the analogy has been made to the idiomotor action or dowsing, and it would seem that the facilitators in some cases at least are innocently acting innocently. They really think they're helping people to communicate. But from our point of view, too, with our experience in testing these sort of things, it would be, yes, I guess, relatively easy to construct a test to see whether the person, the incapacitated person, does have the true power of which was claimed for them, that to be able to think well and communicate and so forth. And the classic example would be simply to have a conversation with this person away from the facilitators and then ask the facilitators to translate the thoughts of the person. And when that's been done in the past, of course, nothing has happened.
Absolutely. It's easy to test.
From our point of view, I think so. Of course, that would vary on a case-by-case basis. And we'll certainly check out the updated Wikipedia. And you might also want to include this a link to this piece by James Randi and Paul Willis.
It might already be there. We have got everything but the kitchen sink in there.
I'll have to check it out. Now,
yeah, quite extensive. We even add all the case histories of harm. We have included all kinds of things they say that, you know, their studies or whatever that say that it works. And also the rebuttal. We have 183 citations.
Wow, that's extensive. That's extensive stuff. Now, apart from that, Susan, I understand that you'll shortly be on tour. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, yes. I'm going to be traveling around doing the Wikipedia talk, trying to get more people to come and edit for us. I'm going to be leaving in a few days. I'm going in July to do a northwestern tour. I'm going up to Seattle, Washington, and then driving home. And I think I'm taking 10 days and doing 8 lectures.
Wow, that's fantastic. And that part of the country is beautiful.
Right. So I'm going to be speaking in 2 lectures in Seattle, 1 in Tacoma, Portland, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Ashland, Oregon, Humboldt, California, Sacramento, and then home. So if you're somebody who is in that area, please check out our website. You can get all the details from my abouttimeproject.wordpress.com, and you can see GSOW on tour, and you can get all the details. We have all the links there for you.
That's fantastic. Look, folks, if you're not in that area yourself, but you know people who might be interested, please let them know. Please let them know. I've attended many talks and lectures by Susan Gerbic, and they're always fascinating, and you learn so much. You really do. Well, Susan, we'll keep an eye on this story of the facilitated communications, folks. In this week's show notes, I'll also add a link to the video, and you can see this young boy, Jonathan Bryan, for yourself, and you can see what you make of it from the video. But for now, Susan Gerbic with your lovely theme music coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Hi, g'day. I'm Dr. Carl, and I'm honoured to be speaking at Skepticon Australia 2018. And first, were the hippies right when they said that reality is only for people who can't handle drugs? Well, we're going to explore that. So what is the real colour of the universe? Do people use only 10% of their brain? Do the 7 deadly sins actually still exist? Do diet drinks get you drunker. How can you tell quickly if a list of numbers is faked? And are we living in the best or the worst of times? And what generates more power on a weight per weight and volume for volume basis? The sun or your compost pile? And worst of all, I'll tell you the real truth about Santa.
Meet Dr. Carl Kruszelnicki at Skepticon 2018, the Australian Skeptics National Convention, October the 13th and 14th at the Concourse, Chatswood. Tickets available at convention.skeptics.com.au.
Here's some unsettling news for those of you living and listening to the show in Sydney. This flyer has been appearing in letterboxes around the city. It's an interesting piece of work. It shows the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge being engulfed by a tsunami. And the heading says, "A prophetic warning from God. Tsunami to hit Sydney, 20th of September, 2018. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my Holy Spirit on all flesh. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." End quote. Acts 2:17. The Spirit of Jesus is the Spirit of prophecy. Only Jesus knows the end from the beginning, for he alone is God, the Alpha and the Omega. Quote, "I have declared the former things from the beginning. They went forth from my mouth, and I caused them to hear it. Suddenly I did them, and they came to pass." End quote. Isaiah 48:3. It goes on. For many years, Christ Jesus has been speaking to his people who are born again of his Holy Spirit through visions and dreams, warning them of an awful devastation to befall the city of Sydney. From Newcastle to the north to Nowra in the south, a tsunami of such magnitude is going to hit the coastline that up to 400,000 people are going to lose their lives. The eastern foreshore will be destroyed. Cronulla, Bondi, Manly, gone. Harbourside suburbs such as Balmain and Kirribilli swept away. Floodwaters as far as Parramatta. The St George region will be inundated, as will Port Jackson and the airport. The Sydney CBD, or Central Business District, will be flooded, and the Sydney Harbour Bridge destroyed. That would be a pity. I just walked over the Sydney Harbour Bridge the other day. Immediately after the tsunami, an earthquake shall take place, entirely contrary to nature. Okay. The CBD and inner suburbs, such as Newtown, shall be destroyed. Now that is a pity. There's some great restaurants in Newtown. Such carnage shall ensue that martial law will be imposed. Hardly surprising. The epicentre is 4 kilometres from the coast, so close that no forewarning can be given, apart from this one it seems, can be given for people to respond and save their lives. This is your hour of warning. Yes, a very troubling flyer appearing in letterboxes, although it's slightly curious that the picture of the tsunami hitting the Sydney Opera House, the tsunami appears to be coming from inland, if you know the geography of the Sydney Opera House, which is a bit odd. Anyway, a prophetic warning from God for the residents of Sydney. And I'm sure we'll have a party on the 21st of September to celebrate this non-event.
Now, not to be outdone, somebody else, presumably somebody else, recently in the inner west area of Sydney, on railway bridges and along roadsides, plastered over advertising posters for other companies, in this case, Apple. Big posters, yellow, red, black and grey, with a jet with red emissions coming from the engines, like condensation trails. Big letters, weather modification, ! On the other side. But anyway, droughts, melting ice caps and glaciers, bee colony collapse, mass tree die-offs, atmospheric saturation of methane, extreme bushfires, reduced vitamin D production, shortage of food supply, respiratory illness epidemic, neurological disorders, increased UV and skin cancer, complete global omnicide. Join the fight. Help end this crime. Geoengineering watch.org. Frightening stuff. And what's even more mysterious is these posters appeared for about 24 hours and they all vanished. Luckily, I took the opportunity to take a picture of them, and here's another one for the conspiracy theorist, though I don't think it's much of a conspiracy theory. Oh, by the way, there's also a large skull and crossbones on this poster. Yes, so the one for the conspiracy theorist, not much of a conspiracy here. These happened to be, in the locations I saw them, plastered all over advertising for Apple. And the next day they were gone. Make of that what you will.
Oh, hi, Maynard.
Oh, hi, Heidi. Great day in this park.
Yeah, if you like that sort of thing.
Look over there. A yowie.
There are no such things as yowies, silly.
Might be just a dog. A big dog. I think it's a King Charles Spaniel thing. No. It's a yowie.
Maynard, if it's a choice between it being a dog or a yowie...
No, it's a yowie. Yowie. Argument from authority. It's a yowie.
Hey, you two, what are you arguing about?
Maynard thinks that dog-looking thing over there is a yowie.
A yowie?
Or maybe Chewbacca the Wookiee?
I see. Okay, we better look this up in the Skeptics Dictionary online.
The what?
The Skeptics Dictionary online. It features definitions, arguments, and essays on hundreds of strange beliefs, amusing descriptions, and dangerous delusions. It also features dozens of entries on logical fallacies, cognitive biases, perception, science, and philosophy. It's at www.skepdic.com.
Right, Heidi. Prepared to be amazed.
Okay, yowie. Here it is. It's under Bigfoot. It says... Most scientists discount the evidence of Bigfoot because the evidence supporting belief in the survival of a prehistoric biped ape-like creature of such dimensions is scant.
You know, maybe that is just Chewbacca after all.
Here, Chewie, come on. Here, Chewie.
Thank you, Skeptics Dictionary Online.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, are you having trouble keeping up with all the conspiracies and things that are floating around the internet, around the world and around your pub? Well, here's a guy who's got the show for you. On the line, I've got Mike Bohler from Chicago, the second city, the windy city, but most importantly, my kind of town. Mike Bohler hosts a Skeptics Guide to Conspiracy podcast, a weekly show even when he's on vacation, even when he's on holidays. He's there every week for you, letting you know who's doing what, where in the world of conspiracies. Is that an adequate introduction, Mike?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe a little bit over the top, but I'm cool with that.
I think it's about time you've got a bit of over the topness, because you've been doing shows even when you're supposed to be on vacation or holidays, as we say here in Australia.
I just can't get away from it. I think with our current administration that's trying to run our country, everything's come up a notch. I'm just trying to keep up with it now. I mean, it used to be pretty easy. You get your, people think that the government takes down buildings in New York or, stuff like that. But now it's like...
I got to say, because I mean, with just the work of Alex Jones and the Trump administration alone, that would keep you in business for life.
Easily, very easily.
Now, when did you decide to do a weekly conspiracy show summing up things? Was there something that tripped you? Was there some point on your sort of skeptical journey you went, hang on, it's about time this was logged on a weekly basis?
Well, actually, it was the election here. I saw a lot of conspiracy type talk. I mean, I've been following Alex Jones for years. When I first started the podcast, it seemed like all of a sudden, like now Alex Jones has become legitimized by having this guy in the White House. So, and it kind of kicked things up a little bit. And it was like, you know what, maybe it is a good idea. Plus, I was getting lazy there for a little bit. And actually, I think I was off for a couple months and constantly researching it. I'm a big history nut, so I like to study the histories and stuff like that. Knowing the history and seeing what's being portrayed in the media or on TV, even how movies they mix up or mess around with history a little bit, trying to come up with these stories, and then all of a sudden we get Donald Trump, who he's the guy who with the Obama birth certificate, and he's talked about all sorts of stuff. When I first started the podcast, the first show I did was the 1919 Black Sox scandal, where the Chicago White Sox threw the World Series. And doing that research, and it's like I come across an article that magically these depositions that disappeared from the court actually reappeared in the lawyers who had represented the players in their files. And they found these depositions that disappeared. So anything's possible.
And of course, on a weekly basis, it seems to change so often. Where's your stance on Alex Jones? Originally, I found him as an entertainer. I found him quite funny. But there are people that take him deadly seriously, and that's what worries you in your podcast, I can hear.
Yeah, definitely. He sides with the alt-right or the ultra-conservative, and in his early career had the Waco standoff, the Branch Davidians, and the Oklahoma City bombing had...
and of course, he would have been right on top of Ruby Ridge as well.
I don't see him talking much about it, but that may be about the time he was dropping out of college.
Right.
Yeah, because then he started doing a local Austin, Texas. I think he started in some of the radio as a commentator. Then he got onto public community cable access. And then he eventually built his own show, became anti-government, had appealed to the militia movement that was happening at the time.
Well, this is the thing I normally find about most conspiracies. There's normally a kernel of something in there, even something as wild as David Icke. He always starts with something reasonable, like, do you ever wonder why the education system doesn't really educate and why the justice system isn't really just? And you go, oh, yeah, you might have a bit of a point then. And before you know it, there's lizards.
That's the playbook. I mean, that's the only that's the best way I can describe it. It's the conspiracy playbook. You got to hook them. When you write up a story or a book, you got to get that hook to get the person to start reading it, and you build up on the crazy. Because Alex Jones was really good at not bringing religion heavily into his show early on. You would get little maybe bits and pieces. Now he's, I think when he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, he started talking about this fifth dimensional beings that have influenced the church, whatever. He starts bringing the religion into it. Enough crazy to get you interested, but maybe not enough to push you over the edge.
I guess that's why I first saw him when he did a tour of England, and he was over there just winding things up, banging on about the Second Amendment, challenging people to fights on television and all that sort of thing. So that's why I saw him as an entertainer. But and from this distance, I can probably take that sort of view of him. But as you said, close up, there are people that genuinely think that there was going to be a second civil war start on the 4th of July this month.
Exactly. He's been attacking the Democrats, the liberals, and he's been playing the Pizzagate. I have noticed about Alex Jones, he doesn't really have an original thought. Most of the stuff is coming from like a David Icke. David Icke has talked about the reptilian, this secret societies and how they're interlinked with the Vatican and all this stuff. Well, Alex takes that part. He slides away the reptilian part, but he'll talk about, these entities that are controlling the Vatican, or you'll have him, Jim Mars, who's somewhat famous with the JFK assassination.
Oh yeah,
conspiracy.
His book Crossfire's a classic in the field.
You're right, exactly, and he takes from that some of the stuff about the secret societies and so on. He takes the pieces. I kind of wish I could understand it a little better, or maybe, I work a day job, so I don't have the time to sit for hours trying to pile through, thousands of documents. But from what I've been able to tell and trying to figure out, Jones really is just repeating what other more the crazier side is talked about, and then trying to blend in the anti-globalists, like foreign trade, free trade agreements, the globalist agenda type stuff. That seems to be his core. But he'll take, the David Icke, what he can use to where it's not the crazy side, but it is the almost crazy side, I guess. I can't. It's hard to describe.
Well, Mike Bohler, what I like about the Skeptics Guide to Conspiracy is that it's more like a weekly news report. Like, it's not always in depth. It's just like a breadth of what has gone on that week. And often you pick up on stuff that other shows might have missed because it might have been a brief mention somewhere.
Actually, I wasn't sure if it was going to work, doing a weekly news thing. It gives me a chance to see how the tentacles kind of try to push their way out to try to snare in more and more people. Because I think most rank-and-file conspiracy believers, they'll believe in one or two conspiracies. They may think that 9/11 was an inside job, but they might not think that the Earth is flat or there's the chemtrail stuff. As far as the rank-and-file goes, they're taking little bits and pieces. But if you give them a chance to take this piece and you put this piece together, and again, the conspiracy-minded, I guess the psychology is, being able to put these pieces together. If you throw enough of these pieces out into the media, manipulate it enough, then you start getting people believing in more and more that there is a bigger conspiracy other than what you originally believed.
Well, this is what everybody seems to be aiming for. Everyone's looking for a grand uniting conspiracy theory of them all. And as far as what I can say, I would have thought chemtrails is a good grand uniting one, but that's relatively new. I think if the flat earth theory would be the one, because if you had a flat earth, every single other conspiracy theory ever would flow from that one. Maybe that's the grand united conspiracy theory, a flat earth.
Well, it's been around for a while. The current flat earth belief is mostly a religious based. It's another theory or hypothesis I have is that when you leave religion, they start abandoning the religion, like I think is happening now, but they are seeking out like-minded people or trying to realign themselves in their social groups. So you get something to fill that void that religion used to have. So they're seeking out, they're finding things like believing in conspiracies and so on. I want to say this is also part of the death throes of religion. As the religions are dying out, there are those who are still hanging on to those last threads of what they believe in, and the flat Earth has all that there's, I think, two components here: people trying to hang on to their old religion or the religion that they were associated with or they identified with, and of course, then you also got something new to believe in.
But also, Mike, there is no shortage of genuine conspiracies in the world. I mean, most courtrooms in the world every day experience some sort of conspiracy going on of a criminal kind. So you're just basically imagining that written large and hidden from you, I guess, is what they're thinking.
Possibly. There is the real conspiracy. I've talked about, that's when I did my first show talking about the 1919 White Sox. Mm-hmm. That was a real conspiracy. It was all hidden. Actually, it was a reporter who had explored and asked questions, and eventually revealed that these players were being bribed by gamblers to throw the game. So there are real conspiracies. I try to make sure I make that distinction. Then you start getting into like the 9/11 stuff where.
Also, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, just with 9/11 too. I mean, within the various factions, there's also even the way that the Building 7 was supposed to have been brought down. You've got controlled demolition. You've got people that think that it was done with an orbital platform in space using some sort of beam weapon.
I know there was also the atomic bomb underneath the building. The facts bear out. The building was structurally damaged. The fires inside had weakened the steel, and it didn't melt it. Nobody's ever said that steel was melted. It has been softened, it's been weakened, and having an engineering background, I'm not a structural engineer, but working with structural types and asking these type of questions, once you start compromising your steel inside your building, they're going to come down.
Well, I think the best answer to what happened to Building 7 is if you could have a brief look at that reverse shot or two that helicopters took of the back of the building that you rarely see. There's only a few photos of that, but the back of the building, that building looks stuffed.
Yeah. See, like 9/11, I think is more become political. I guess to best explain this, I think a lot of the modern conspiracies, and again, make the distinction that these are the 9/11s, the JFK, those type of conspiracies that we know are bogus, but they stay alive because I think there's a religious component and a political component to it. Where again, I on the show I've picked on libertarians, and I do this not because I don't like libertarians, but the libertarians seem to embrace conspiracies a little bit more than normal.
I want to ask you, Mike, because you're doing a podcast on a weekly basis, which is hard work. What podcasts do you listen to? What skeptical podcasts do you listen to? Do you have time to?
I try to. Well, I've listened to Cognitive Dissidence.
Oh, which also comes from Chicago in Glory Hole Studios there.
Yeah, exactly. I like this exposing pseudo-astronomy.
That's great. It's not on often enough because he's busy doing real work.
And I got to interview him on my show.
Cool.
I actually got it.
And the great thing about exposing pseudo-astronomy is that when they talk about the face on Mars or they talk about something and there's an outer space conspiracy, he can bring the science to it like very few people. And I would point people towards the skeptical podcast Opening Arguments. That is very good for describing the American legal system and how it works from time to time.
Yeah, that's definitely one. I like listening to that one.
Well, look, it's been great chatting to you, Mike. Now, tell us where we can find you, how often we can find you, what's the best website to go to, and how to get in contact with you.
If you go to MikeBohler.com.
So that's MikeBohler.com. Yeah. Cool. And it's a Skeptic's Guide to Conspiracy. You can subscribe to that through your usual Android or iTunes places, and you get a weekly dose of what's going on from your perspective. And there'll be at least 3 stories every week because there's never less than 3 new conspiracies a week, you reckon, Mike?
That's the way it's been going. So,
look, Mike Bohler, a Skeptic's Guide to Conspiracy. Look him up, and look, thanks for joining us on here we are at the Skeptic Zone here. Now, is there something about Australia you know that you'd like? What's your main fact you know about Australia?
All the animals want to kill you.
Well, I'll be very careful when I go outside. Look, the thing is, we haven't got as many guns either, so we've just got to hit them with rulers, and they're metric rulers too, so they're not as big as yours.
I'm trying to think of something funny to go along with this.
Look, it's been great chatting to you because there's always something to talk about in the world of conspiracies. Thank you, Skeptics Guide to Conspiracy, Mike Bohler. It's been great talking to you live from Chicago.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Ben Radford here. If I can have a minute of your time, I'd like to shamelessly plug my new book. It's called Investigating Ghosts, the Scientific Search for Spirits. It examines ghost hunting and ghost investigations from a historical, cultural, and evidence-based perspective, from the Victorian era to modern TV ghost hunters. It is, in a way, a follow-up to my 2010 book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, How to Solve Unexplained Mysteries. That book was more general, covering everything from psychics to crop circles to monsters and ghosts. But I realized that ghosts are a special category. Not only are ghosts the most popular paranormal pursuit, but ghost hunting also has its own set of assumptions and challenges. The book will be available soon for under $20 and is currently available as an ebook. For more information on the book and me, check out benjaminradford.com. Please check it out. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, sharp-eared listeners would have noticed during this show my voice varies a little bit because I'm experimenting with this new wonderful microphone. I'm adjusting the levels and using the sound box, the sound booth, and then not using it and holding it differently. So, it's all very interesting. It's all experimentation, but I think with a little bit of tweaking, I'll get the best results. Now, just a reminder for those people in Canberra, in the nation's capital, the Canberra Skeptics, this Tuesday, the 24th of July, from 6:30 p.m., are having a free lecture, Strategy Strikes Back, How Star Wars Explains Modern Military Conflict. This is going to be at the Belconnen Soccer Club with dinner to follow. The speaker is Mick Cook, who hosts the Dead Prussian podcast and is passionate about encouraging critical thought on war among military professionals and policy makers. Always an interesting talk at the Canberra Skeptics. If you can go along, more information at facebook.com/Canberra Skeptics. If you know anybody in the Canberra area who might be interested, please let them know. That's Strategy Strikes Back, How Star Wars Explains Modern Military Conflict, and you can socialize with other like-minded people. Coming up on next week's show, we have, well, I can't see into the future. I don't know. Reports, possibly. You know what? I can't wait until the opportunity arises where Maynard and I can do a field report together, both using our wonderful Yellowtech IXM microphones. And I think that opens up all sorts of interesting new possibilities. I really like the way this microphone, in a crowded situation, can sort of suppress the background chatter so you can hear the interview in progress. And I can't thank the listeners enough, the listeners who support the Skeptic Zone financially. It's only because of you the show keeps going, and it's only because of you that I'm able occasionally to buy very nice new equipment. And my one hope is that I can continue to inform and entertain on the podcast. I wonder where those Skeptic Zone cats are. I shooed them out of the studio before. We've got people wanting to hear more of them. They don't say very much. At dinner time, they'll say something. Let me see. I'll just open the door. Aha. Here's one now. It's Henrietta, because I've got the back scratcher out. Come on, you want a back scratch? There we go. Oh, she likes that. Hey? She doesn't say much, though. They're very shy when it comes to interviews. All right, out you go. No? She wants some more. Use your imagination, folks. There we go. Okay, well, she's a happy cat now. So until next week, this is Richard Saunders and Henrietta, the Skeptic Zone cat, signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. And I think it's probably appropriate that the first time this microphone is actually used is in a pub with Maynard.
Good evening and welcome to Newtown, although it is probably 3 a.m. in the morning, or it could be 11 a.m, I don't really know. But that's why we have these microphones, Richard, so that we can record whatever we're doing at whatever the time of the day, even if we don't know what time it is. As we're looking around here, again, people aren't really hushing, rushing or flashing in Newtown, but they keep it to themselves. But you must be happy with this purchase.
I'm happy, and I would like to thank the listeners, the supporters of the Skeptic Zone who subscribe via Patreon or micropayments with PayPal. It's because of you I was able to afford this wonderful Yellowtech professional microphone, and I will look forward to many happy times using this to get reports for the Skeptic Zone. Now, this is the microphone you've been using for some years, Maynard.
That's correct. It's an industry standard. It's quite expensive normally. You got it for a good price on eBay. I've got to say, you got it for about $300 less than I got mine, and mine was a couple of $100. It's basically a microphone that when you record into it, it holds the audio for about 7 seconds, and in that 7 seconds it treats it to what is the voice, what is the background, what do you want to hear, what should I do with the level, and it does all that in 7 seconds and puts it down to an SD card. And as you'll find, and as you've heard all my reports on the Skeptic Zone, they're fantastic. In fact, I would point you towards the Maynard story when I went to see the Pet Shop Boys. I was actually interviewing people in front of the main speakers of the Pet Shop Boys while they were performing, and you would not know it. You can hear the sound, but it's not interrupting what they're doing. It's a fantastic microphone.
And last week, folks, the introduction to the show we did at Maynard Studios was done on his Yellowtech microphone. So we've just opened up the packet. We're in a pub celebrating with a glass of champagne. Cheers.
Oh, here you go.
Because Maynard found this for me.
Cheers. Yes.
And I'm absolutely delighted. And once again, thank you to the listeners who support the show financially. Without you, there'd be no show, and without you, I couldn't afford to get this microphone, and I hope that it serves me well for many years to come.
Indeed it will. And now, before we get thrown out, I think we should turn the microphone off.